some delay to introduce Nicoletta Calzolari, who is at this moment the head of Istituto di Linguistica Computazionale in Pisa, Italy, and I think you're the head of LREC this year.
Yes.
Which is a big
Portugal,
work. Which is a big work.
Because we had so many submissions.
She's going to talk to us about semantic lexicons and semantic tagging.
Okay, thanks. Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm very glad to be here. I heard so many things that are going on here during the day. And I'm also glad because I'm away from LREC for a few days because we are preparing the program. It's difficult to put all this submission in a program, so that's good. I won't speak about all of the things that we do in our institute in Pisa, but I concentrate on two topics. In reality, semantic lexicons and semantic tagging. And if I have time, I'll say something about what we are doing towards content interoperability. I say if I have time because I have many, many slides, and probably we don't have time to write at the end. So anyway. So it's work done by many groups in our institute, not just by myself, obviously. And I'm afraid that, in particular, speaking about semantic tagging more than semantic lexicons, I'll have more problems to mention than solutions. But that's the situation with semantic tagging, I think. So what we have done, not just in Italy, but in Europe in the last decade or so, has been to try to build what we called an infrastructure of language resources for many languages in Europe. Mainly the main type of resources that we have built for many languages together in European projects are semantic networks. You know about the EuroWordNet, Balkanet, etc., all of them modeled on WordNet with some changes that we have introduced in EuroWordNet. Then a number of other lexicons, the so-called parole simple lexicons, now enlarged in Italy in a national project, CLIPS, and I say a few words about this. Then quite a number of tree banks for many different languages in Europe. And what is interesting that most of these resources has been built either on the basis of some international standards. So we had all this set of initiatives to set up standards for lexicon encoding and semantic and annotation, or they've become some sort of de facto standard like the WordNet lexicons. And this we believe that is important. But all this infrastructure is what I call a static infrastructure of resources that we build is there to be used. But we know that it's absolutely not enough to deal with language because these resources, they will never be complete, not by accident, but because it's theoretically impossible that they are complete, not in size and not in depth or granularity of information. So by necessity, we have to change the paradigm, and obviously what we are doing, many groups all over the world, to go for some sort of dynamic language resources using different types of learning, machine learning methods, or lexical acquisition systems, or extraction of information, and so on. So we have groups doing this type of things also in our institute. And while doing this, then if you don't do completely unsupervised extraction or learning, then you may need also a whole infrastructure of tools to deal with your language. And that's what we have, even though I don't speak about it now in this talk. We have all an infrastructure of tools going from tokenizer, lematizer, chunker, functional analyzer for Italian, which is very robust, can be used also on the web. So if someone is interested, we can give the web page and a password to test them. And if you are interested, you can have them. Now, just very quickly, I mentioned what we have for Italian, just as an example, because this type of resources, as you know, they are in Europe for many other languages. So I don't tell you what WordNet and Ital WordNet, where you see the leaning tower there, just the figures of our each WordNet is about 50,000 lemmas, and the usual model. And here we have something like 130,000 semantic relations of different types, obviously mainly hyperonymy, eponymy, etc., but also many other types of relations. What do we have in addition to the usual WordNet model is we have in the model now the possibility to have plugins for domain lexicons, for terminological lexicon, in order that we can have a general lexicon, which is in the middle, let's say, and then a constellation of, potentially a constellation of domain-specific WordNets. And at the moment, we are working with another institute of a legal WordNet and someone at our institute for a WordNet of maritimal terms. And we may be working for the Digital Olympics in Beijing with terms from the field of sport or tourism, these type of things. The other types of lexicons that we have developed, and we have coordinated all the European projects which have developed these lexicons, are the parole for syntax and simple lexicons for semantics. These were the amount of entries that were in the European, at the end of the European projects, parole project and simple project. And this is the size of this lexicon for Italian as it is now after a national project. Now we have 55,000 words with phonology, morphology, and syntax, quite a lot of information on subcategorization, really with very granular information. And not all of them have semantics, because you see we have 55,000 senses with semantics, which is less than the 55,000 words. And I tell you now in a moment the type of information that we have for semantics, which is somehow complementary with respect to what we have in WordNet. And for many types of natural language processing, I believe that what we have here could be much more useful in a sense than WordNet, because it has much more contextual information, I think, not only of predicative type. So the overall organization of these lexicons, the model is the following. There is a so-called type ontology on top, which is the same for all the 12 lexicons that have been implemented in this European project. All of these lexicons for all the 12 languages share the same model, at the point where we had just one DTD for all the lexicon, for morphology, for syntax, for semantics. And the DTD was the same for morphology for languages such as Catalan or German or even Finnish, and also for syntax. Now for semantics, there is this type ontology, which is of rather high level, because you see we have something like 150 ontology types, so not many. But it's very different from the ontology that we have on top of EuroWordNet, because on top of EuroWordNet we have in the ontology just features, just labels. While here each ontology type has an internal structure which is given by a template, and in the template for each different semantic class or each ontological type there are some types of information, for example, that are obligatory for that type, other types which are not possible for the type. So there is some semantics in the type, built in the type. And the templates helped also the lexicographers to be, as far as possible, coherent in building the lexical entries which instantiate the templates for the different ontological classes. So in the instantiation in the lexicon, the basic unit here is what we call the semantic unit, the sense, and that's also different from WordNet, where the basic unit is the synset. And this is another point where I think this is better, for example, for machine translation, because for machine translation, you can't absolutely work with a scene set, because different synonyms in a scene set have absolutely different contextual properties in general, not always, but in general. So you can't translate when the basic unit is the scene. You have to go at the level of individual sense. And each semantic unit is linked to quite a lot of different types of information, the so-called qualia relations. This comes, as you know, from the generative lexicon of James Pustoyevsky, even though we have enlarged the concept of this qualia. That is, we don't have just the 4 qualia roles, but each qualia role has been made much more granular. So we have, for example, something like, I don't remember, 50 types of different specific telic roles of different nature, which go in between, go towards trying to capture a lot of world knowledge information in this sense, in this way. Then we have information about derivatives, polysemy, and here I mean regular polysemy, and the type of event. And then we have all the predicative layer with predicate, argument, selection, preferences, not restrictions. I shouldn't put restrictions. And this predicative layer is linked to the syntactic lexicon, obviously. So that's the type of information that we have in general for each entry, whenever that's necessary to have for an entry, not everything for every entry. So here we have just an example of a word, the word aumento, increase, as in the sense that the increase of prices from the government. Then we have the ontological information. This is a reference to the semantic type. The second is redundant, the supertype, which is the other in the hierarchy. That's not necessary. You have information on the event type, the domain, then a gloss for human usage. And then you have what we have called the extended qualia information. So for the ISA relation is always there, and then depending on the word, you may use one or the other of the relation, or even more. You can have even 2 or 3 different types of telic relations. And these relations go from one word sense to another word sense. They are relation between word senses. So for example, aumento has this relation resulting state, maggiore has a feature is adjective type, a direction, up. It's a morphological derivation from the verb aumentare. And then we have the predicative information here, where we have just one predicate for both the main verb and all the different derived nouns. For example, they are linked to just one predicate, and what is changing is obviously the linking between the arguments and the different positions in the subcategorizations.
Any gloss for that sentence?
The increase of prices on the part of the government, from the government. And for the different arguments, then you have some sort of thematic roles. And then you have, where possible, some semantic preference of the filler of that argument. So that's the type of information. As you see, it's quite a lot of information. And for example, what is important is that I believe with this qualia, extended qualia relations, we are able to capture really quite many dimensions of the meaning of a word according to different types of perspective, the telic perspective or the compositional perspective and so on. And these qualia relations very often give information on the contextual behavior of the word. They capture some contextual property of the word. And that's why they can be useful, and they are very good, as we have seen, to represent, for example, the information, what happens in between multi-words, between the different components of a multi-word, to capture the syntactic and semantic relations which are inside, between, for example, the two nouns of a noun-noun compound and so on. And given all these different types of relation, we can, for example, start with a word and explore some sort of domain or semantic class. So if we start with the verb mangiare, to eat, then following all the different paths given by the different types of relations, we can have, I don't know, we can have all the different instruments which are used when you produce some food which will be eaten, or you have the different types of food which are eaten, and so on, and the type of people who work or who do something with respect to eating, etc. So we have different perspective on the lexicon, and somehow I think that we implement here the notion of the lexicon as a big relational model, where everything acquires the meaning because it's in some relation with respect to many other objects in the lexicon.
Do you have this for how many verbs?
We have
this kind of...
That's extracted from the different entries. So we have now this information for 55,000 senses distributed over nouns, verbs, and adjectives mainly.
And you could extract this
it's possible to extract this type of information from the information that we had in the form of the template that I mentioned before. Yes, exploiting all the different types of relations. So what I think is that this type of information can be useful if one knows how to use it. That's the problem, maybe to make inferences, for example. Can be a basis also for working together with automatic means to extract information and to fill gaps, because obviously not everything is encoded in the lexicon. But the model provides the possibility to encode, for example, many sorts of function relations that you may find in text, and you can encode them for a specific domain, for example. The model allows to encode this type of information.
And the ovals that you have used for an object of,
yes,
is the activity of, are these the kinds of links that you have?
These are some of the specific types of the telic relations that we have, for example. Yes. While I don't know if they are here. So used for object of the activity, type of telic relations. Created by is a type of agentive relation. And then in the constitutive, we have things like part of or set of, or even something, you say, which is the material of something is done of wood or of, this is part of the constitutive qualia. So you can encode really, you are going towards world knowledge, the possibility of encoding a lot of world knowledge information here. This information which is in between the lexicon and encyclopedia. And I don't want to put any borderline because no one knows where to put borderlines, I think. So.
Just staying there.
Yeah.
So this is to eat, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so you have there a container, for instance. You have container on bottom, instrument container.
Okay, because it's, if it is here, it's because somewhere in the entry of some container type, there is, that container of some sort of food, some sort of food.
Plate, for eating.
For eating.
Might have that.
Yes, exactly. It's only because there is something related to eating in one or the other relation of some type of container. Yes.
When you have, do you have this explicit, like, edible thing? Like, does this have,
yes.
Does this have a link to every food that you could eat, or
yes.
Does it sort of link to edible, and then you have?
We have a feature edible. Yes.
So you don't have explicit relation to every single piece
yes.
of food that
Yes. I think that it's. You see there on the top left. There is this plus edible. In this case, this is a feature, not a relation. It's a long story why we have introduced this feature. Maybe we don't go now here. It's because it has to do because natural objects usually shouldn't have the telic function, which is more of artifacts. But now some natural object that we eat has the function to be eaten. So we didn't use the tailic function, but we have this edible feature. It's a sort of compromise. So, and just to say just another word on this lexicon in a sort of feasibility project that we had. It was really an NSF project, and I was participating without money from, from Europe with Chuck Fillmore mainly, and with Ralph Grishman and Nancy Hyde. We had a 1-year feasibility study how to deal with multi-words, and we have focused on 2 types of multi-words, noun-noun in English, which in Italian are noun prepositional phrase, and on support verb or light verb constructions. And what was very interesting to me is that working and starting with 2 different frameworks, which were the FrameNet approach to the lexicon and the corpus, and the parole simple approach based partially at least on the generative lexicon. Both these theoretical frameworks were able to make the same type of generalizations on the type of relations which are there in between the different parts of the multiword, and to capture the same type of information, even though with different formal apparatus. And it was rather good to see that in general, the formal apparatus that was already there, for example, in simple, in particular the qualia relations, were good to capture quite a lot of the semantic relations which are there inside a multiword in between, for example, the 2 nouns. So, for example, here I have some examples, different types of multiwords. Again, you don't know where to put the borderline of multiwords, but these are the English words: butcher's knife, plastic knife, or table knife, or hunting knife. And in Italian, you see that we have a noun followed by a prepositional phrase. Here we have 3 times the same preposition and 1 time another preposition, but all of these, this is represented with the constitutive, 1 type of constitutive qualia, this with the telic qualia, telic relations, but the telic relations of different type, because one is the telic, let's say, used by, or used in, or used in an activity, and they have different types of selection restriction or selection preference on the second noun, human, material, location, activity, with the same preposition da in these 3 cases. And this qualia information may be very useful also, for example, in disambiguating prepositional phrases. And that's just an easy example. You have in Italian piatto di legno or piatto di pasta, which are on the surface absolutely the same structure. Both of them are represented with a constitutive relation, but 2 different types of constitutive relations. One is the one that we have named made of, and the other the one contains, for containers. And again, different are the selection restrictions. So with this qualia, you are able to use them, I think, to guide somehow and some algorithm to extract information from text, to guide the extraction, and then what is important to me, to represent what you have extracted. Because that's something that in many acquisition systems, one stops at the moment of acquiring information without being able to model this information somewhere. And even more, I believe, when we do automatic acquisition, it's very important to link automatic acquisition to some model on how to represent what you acquire, if you want to use it. And if you want, for example, to use what you acquire together with something that is acquired by someone else, another type, another mode, another location. Okay? So that's it for the lexicons. Let's go to something about semantic annotation. I say something about some experiences that we had in some different contexts. That's an experience in a small experiment within ELSNet where we annotated just the predicate argument type of the sentence, just for 20 verbs, 1,000 contents to analyze different types of aspects of verb semantics. This was a small experiment anyway. This is the composition of the Italian syntactic semantic tree bank that we have. It's smaller than the pen tree bank. It's made up mainly of newspapers and some magazines. And this is the size, this 300,000 words. And here we have the average sentence length. We are discussing this morning with someone. The average sentence length is 25 words, which I believe is much higher than the average sentence length for English, I think. At least we compared this with the average sentence length for English in an old project that we had, and it was, I don't remember, not the double, but
I think
much higher.
Has like 23 average.
Wall Street Journal, the UN tree bank is in the low 20s, 22.
Really? So it's not so different then, in this case. Okay.
In fact, a significant fraction of the sentences are more than some 40-something words long. And as a result, a lot of people who work on parsing usually publish the result and then say, oh, by the way, on the sentences of length 40 and less, we do better.
Yeah.
But that's a significant deletion of the test.
So it's approximately the same size in this case. Okay. So that's the architecture of the tree bank, where we have the orthographic module, the morphosyntactic module. We have two different modules with syntax, one with the constituent structure and one with functional structure. The one that we have done in PISA is this one, and that's the one that we believe is most useful when you go to semantics. And our parser, for example, the output of our parsers gives this type of structure, dependency-based parser. And then the so-called semantic layer is really a lexical semantic annotation, and it's just, let's say, semantic annotation with respect to word senses in WordNet, because at that time, that was the biggest lexicon that we had, not the other one that I just mentioned. And then there is software to deal with all the different modules. This tree bank, it will be available through ELRA to everyone, if you want. And also the lexicons will be available through ELRA at some price for research, not a big price. That's just a screen with the 3 levels of annotation.
So the top is the dependency structure then?
Yeah. And then the the same sentence, and the bottom is the semantic, lexical semantic, but here you don't see the reference to the WordNet senses.
I see, so it's just, but this is just a label on each word, it's not a structure.
No, it's just a pointer to a word sense. Just this plus a little bit more that I tell you in a moment, but not much more. Before starting the building of our tree bank, we made a long survey of what existed in different types of tree banks or syntactically annotated corpora, and so that's what the result of some evaluation of different models. For the lexical semantic level, the reference lexical resources is WordNet, and then we have some additional features for figurative usages, metaphors, metonyms, for example, for so-called alterati. I don't know, because we don't have in English phenomenon of alterazione. No, not alternation, it's a completely different thing. Come si chiamano gli alterati in inglese? Non ci sono. Casetta, casaccia. Diminutive.
But not just diminutive.
But pejorative, all the set of these things, we have just a common noun, which is alterati. Okay. Proper nouns, and then we have different types of annotation units, single words, complex multi-word units, and then we have specific semantic units. We decided for specific type of things like titles of books, titles of paintings, etc. And then we have part of the tree bank which is domain-specific in the economic financial domain. So it's a multi-level structure tree bank which combines syntactic and lexical semantic annotations. And even though the semantic annotation is done with respect to word senses in Ital WordNet, given that if you follow the hierarchies in the WordNet, you go up until the ontology, the WordNet ontology, in a sense, implicitly, you also get some sort of semantic typing of each word, implicitly following these hierarchies. So having this both syntax and semantics together in the tree bank, so it's good if you want to do some corpus-based investigations on the syntax-semantics interface, for example, semantic types associated with functional positions for a certain predicate, or some subcategorization properties associated with specific word, etc. Now, some obvious considerations. When you look for the typical semantic arguments of a verb, then you see that they can be either semantically restricted, rather rare, when you can really speak of semantic or selection restriction, that's very rare, I think. They can be semantically completely unrestricted with respect to a ontological type of the object, for example. No selection restriction. This happens quite often for certain types of verbs, at least. Sometimes it happens that they are semantically unrestricted, but you can define negatively somehow. So you can say which semantic type cannot combine with that predicate. In some cases, it's possible to some sort of negative restriction. And most often, we can speak about selection preferences, so some partially semantically restricted. Here, just one example, the Italian verb arrestare, which has at least two meanings, maybe even more, but at least these two, which go more or less one to the meaning of to stop something or to arrest someone. So they have different preferences. Both of them have some sort of negative connotation on the object for different reasons, but they have negative connotation. Here, for example, the subject is as a preference not human, and in general, the object is not a human, while here the subject is a human, or human-like, is like a body, police, or something like that, and the direct object is a human. We could speak probably of selection restriction in this case. What is interesting is that I think there is some interaction among verb and arguments. So the verb meaning somehow either determines or picks up, selects the sense or part of the sense of its direct object or of its subject. So, for example, this verb arrestare in both these senses, frequently selects direct objects which either have themselves as such, let's say objectively, a negative connotation, or are given by the verb a negative connotation. Most of the examples that I have here, they have as such a negative connotation, but one of them at least have not the word traffico, which means the traffic in itself is neutral. But if it is arrested the traffic, then you receive some sort of negative connotation, while these other words have a negative connotation by their nature, let's say, not because of the context. But that's another type of interaction here with another word, comprendere. Comprendere in one of its meaning, in the meaning of to include. Another meaning is to understand, but that's different. The subject is always goes to the ontology type group set of things because it's a collective usually. So, but that's easy. But the interaction sometimes go in the other direction, that is somehow from the argument to the verb. So also the sense or the semantic type of the direct object may help to characterize different senses or different nuances of meaning of a verb. Here I have some different nuances of the verb, of the Italian verb coprire. In some of these examples, it can be translated, I think, as cover, but in other, I don't think it's translated as cover, for example, in English. And it's the direct object which determines somehow the position of the meaning of this verb in a conceptual space of generic covering. So here the direct object is a period of time or a space, and these are translated as cover in English, I think. But you can say coprire una persona, a person, or coprire un reato, something badly done, I don't know the English word. But I don't know if you say to cover in this. You say this, it's the same in English. Okay. To cover a crime. To cover a person also.
Cover up a person. I don't know the person.
Well, for example, in the corpus we have coprire un mafioso. That's.
Hide.
And then that's what I put here. Yeah. That's what I thought that it was more hide than cover. Okay. And here is the type of, the semantic type of the object, which determines a little different nuance.
Different from cover-up.
Yes, it's different. Yeah. So these different nuances of meanings, you may not need them at the monolingual level, but they may be very important at the multilingual level. Here I have an example, but we don't go through it, abbandonare. When you go in the corpus, in a dictionary you have more or less these three main senses. When you go in the corpus, you find many granular distinctions, more granular distinctions, because there are different semantic types and so on and so on. So the question is, should we, in a lexicon, in a conversation, should we take care of this granularity of distinction, or we can simply group these fine-grained distinctions in three or more main senses, and we could add additional information, for example, as collocational information associated to a main sense. I would be in favor of some of this double way of encoding things, that is to reduce the number of senses, not to have too many senses, because it's not natural, but then within each sense to go to, and to have a lot of corpus information together, which gives all the different contextual ways of realizing this sense with different nuances of information. And many of this granular information, and in reality, they are needed for, again, for translation. They may not be needed for other tasks, but they are needed for translation. So it's clear that the word sense is complex. And what is bad, somehow, is it seems that you have in the text, in the context, very different clues to decide, which help you in deciding, in selecting the right sense in this context. So sometimes it's a specific syntactic pattern, like, for example, the verb comprendere. If it is followed by that clause, then it's not to include, but it's to understand. That's easy. And it's a syntactic pattern which helps you. Or this aprire, to open, plus prepositional phrase introduced by the preposition a is a very peculiar sense. Aprire a qualcuno, that is to be in favor of someone, or something like that. Sometimes it's not the syntactic pattern, sometimes it's the domain of the text which helps you in selecting a sense instead of another. For example, if you know that the domain is law, then perseguire has one sense and not another. Or very often I found that it's not so much the information on the argument, but information on so-called adjuncts or modifiers, which is really the type of information which gives you the clue to decide, let's say, which is the proper sense for a polysomos predicate. And modifiers, I think, play a big role in many cases, even adverbs. Here, for example, it's the adverb, I think, benissimo, which is critical to say that this is understand more than to include. So modifiers, I think, play a much bigger role than in general it is said. It's not arguments, which are the only important thing. And then it's the semantic type of either the subject or the object and so on, which helps in selecting a meaning, or even different synonyms, antonyms, select different senses of co-current words. And we know, and it's usually said, and it's true in general, that different senses of a lemma cannot be selected simultaneously in the same context. So we cannot say Leo arresta il colpevole e il corso degli eventi. That is, we cannot have the verb arrestare in both meaning to stop and to arrest in the same context. That's true in general, but we will see examples where, in a sense, this is not true. We will see in a moment. Even though there are these tests somehow to decide which is the sense, the correct sense for a polysemous word, the problem is that on one side there are not sure tests. It's difficult that one test is 100% sure. And they have only partial validity, not completely discriminating. And what is the worst thing, I think, is that it's difficult to predict when to apply which text, when a text on syntax, on the semantic type of the subject, and so on and so on. So that's one of the difficulties. And in reality, what happens is that word senses ambiguation in different contexts is really better achieved using different types of information at different linguistic level of description. But we don't know a priori. We know a posteriori, but we don't know, and the system doesn't know a priori, I think, which one to apply when, in which context. So a priori is unpredictable. Where is the clue? You can acquire information on where is the clue by looking at a lot of text. This can be done, obviously. So the availability of large quantities of, for example, semantically tagged corpora may help to analyze the impact of different clues to perform better word-sensitive information in different contexts, and to study, also to study the interaction of the clues at different levels of different linguistic levels to improve word-sensitive information strategies. And the problem is when we acquire, if we are able to acquire automatically, for example, this syntactic or semantic or collocational, that is lexical indicators, what we do with them. Do we want to list them in our lexicon? Do we want to enrich our lexicons with all this type of information as clues that can be afterwards reused? That's a question I'd like to know what you think about. For example, here just an example of what some of the people at my institute, they do. That's not so much for semantic clustering, but for this one, they do also semantic clustering, but for discriminating different senses of a verb. Here we have the verb fondere, which has at least these two meanings, to melt and to blend or to mix, something like that. And if we extract information on raw text with no syntactic information, that's what we get. But then I don't remember how they do that, but they can divide the set of words that are together with this in different clusters.
These words are words which occur in the same sentence or something?
No, in different sentences with this.
No, I understand, but,
yeah.
But metallo is a word which occurred in some sense with the word verb fondere.
Yes, as an object.
And it was an object.
As an object.
As an object.
That's this O there. So they've extracted all the, after having parsed the text, they've extracted all the possible objects, and then clustering with other, depending on how these words co-occur with other types of verbs in the same syntactic position, they can discriminate and divide this set into different subsets, and these two somehow correspond, in fact, to the two different main senses of this verb. Hmm?
So you're saying that there are these 9 objects of the verb fondere.
Yeah.
Based on how they behave with other verbs.
Yes.
They're clustered into 2 clusters.
Yes.
And it so happens that those 2 clusters correspond to the 2 senses.
To 2 meanings of the verbs. The problem is, I think, that it's okay to discriminate automatically what you know. Just automatically you know that you have 2 different behaviors of this verb, which you may imagine that are 2 different senses. But with the statistical means at the moment, you don't know what they are, these 2 things, apart from the fact that they occur with different clusters of words. Yeah. But you don't know what they are in reality, so my problem is you don't know how to use this information, maybe. It's not so easy to use the information that you get, unless you are able to somehow link this information to some piece of other information you have in your lexicons, some ontology or something like that. So that's my problem in general with this acquired information.
So if they had, just argument's sake, if they had clustered into 3 separate clusters, then you would conjecture that fondere has 3 senses.
Yeah, that's the conjecture. They say that it works rather well. I've seen some examples, other examples. I have one somewhere here. And some examples are strikingly good. But there is not yet a global evaluation. We don't know. Hmm? And then there is this other problem, how we use what we get. That's the other problem at another level. So, looking at our other annotation work that we have done in the framework of the sensible exercise, you know what it is. There is a sensible going on now, in this moment, more or less. We have just delivered the data, I think, on Monday, the annotated data. There are many things that cannot be easily encoded at the lexical semantic level. And all the cases, I think, where somehow sense interpretation require appeal to extra-linguistic knowledge. They are not easy, because it's not easy to encode or to capture this type of information, because normally you don't have this type of information in a lexicon. Rightly, you don't have it in a lexicon, because in general you have linguistic type of information in lexicon, not the extra-linguistic. So that's a nice sentence that we found in the corpus, where you have a set of metaphors which link with each other. All the sentence is a metaphor, which is l'auto verde arriva sul tavolo del governo. So you have literally is the green car, or the car green arrives on the table of the government. So it's a set of different metaphorical uses of many different, and it's very intricate, because you don't know where a metaphor starts and where a metaphor ends. And the verb arrivare goes very well with the literal sense of auto, because a car can arrive in a place, in a location, but not here. It metaphorically arrives. Where it arrives here, it arrives on a table which is not a table, which means, so when we encode, even in sensible, just with respect to a WordNet sense or synset, it's not clear what to do, because in these dictionaries we don't have metaphorical sense unless they are really lexicalized, etc. So it's a problem. So not all these shifts of meaning can be captured, or not. They must not be captured, probably, in a lexicon. It's not the right place, the lexicon, in a sense, as traditionally we think of the lexicon, to put a lot of world knowledge information, but we need it on the other side, I think. So we have to put it somewhere. We have to extract and we have to encode it, I believe. So here, but we can skip this example of a lot of collocational information with respect of the verb tagliare, to cut, which again, it does not necessarily imply sense distinction at monolingual level. We can say both are one sense of cut, no problem, in Italian, no problem. But then if you want to use this to go for a translation, in some cases you need this type of granular information. And that's collocational information of syntagmatic nature. Then problem of regular polysemy. We said before, a moment ago, that probably we have to finish sometime. We cannot have the actual occurrence of two senses of the same word or the same verb in the same context, but we have found examples where it happens more than once, and it happens a lot, for example, with where there is alternation between act and result in the verbal nouns.
Where there's alternation between what?
Act, the act and result, for in the verbal nouns. And in the lexicons, usually you have these two senses. And that's correct, because in many cases, it's either the act or the result. But there are many contexts where in the same context, somehow, you have both the act, or you are not able to decide. Yeah. For example, this one with Berlusconi. I'm sorry, Berlusconi doveva scegliere se fare l'uomo di governo o mantenere il controllo delle sue TV. This word controllo, the control can be either the active sense of control or the result.
Oh, I see. So it's not that there are two uses.
No. It's one word.
One word has two interpretations.
With both interpretation, which may be valid in one sentence. And this happens, that's what we think, this happens rather frequently with the verbal nouns, with this type of regular polysemy. So what it means, I think it means that there is the need of some underspecified meaning, probably, in the lexicon, because we need both. Sometimes we need the two different senses, sometimes you need an underspecified meaning which has both of them, which subsumes both of them.
And this control, I mean, I assume that it needs to maintain the control of his
TV.
And so, but that's in the metaphoric sense, it doesn't have the literal sense. I mean, he's not going to control his TV by turning down.
No, it's control is power.
Exactly. So it's not two senses in that position. It's only the sense of power. It's
maintain
not the sense of controlling.
No, the active control, I think, is there, but also the result.
He can control financially, like meaning that he doesn't put in a trust fund, or he control even though he put in that someone else is running his company. So there are two different meanings, at least for an average Italian.
Also for you.
Yes.
Okay. Well.
Anyway. I have the impression that, in a sense, when we use dictionaries in general, but also our computational lexicon, there is some sort of theoretical language which is invented by lexicographers or by linguists, because as we need to classify things in classes which are with clear boundaries, but language is not like that. Because language, it seems more and more to me, is really a continuum everywhere, resistant to clear-cut distinctions, and by necessity ambiguous. Language is by necessity ambiguous everywhere with respect to imposed classification. So these are, but we already said, many gray areas with respect to semantic annotation, and most of these are where corpus annotation either diverges, in fact, from the lexical resources, whatever it is, or is in need of further specification with respect to what we normally have in a lexical resource. Here just some examples from Sensible, so things that we don't find in any lexicon, either neologisms or strange metaphorical multi-words like scalpador or which is literally a show of gold for a very good football player, something like this.
What of gold?
Shoe.
Shoe of gold.
It's used for some football player.
Oh, I see. Yes.
Yes.
A Czech guy won it this year.
Okay. So you know
He
what it
plays
is.
for Juventus.
I don't know. I'm not an expert.
Pardon? Nedved, yes.
Bravo. Oh, compounds and idioms, we already said. We don't even know where to put the boundaries between a single word or a multi-word. So if to have a verb, andare, a piedi, this can be done. But in other cases, we cannot, I think. For example, or locutions and the figurative use combined together. So for example, in this first sentence, 2 lavoratori su 3 sono a casa. This 2 workers on 3 literally are at home, which has a very nice literal interpretation, are at home. That's no problem, but in reality it doesn't mean that. It means because they are without work. That's the real meaning. So it has a metaphorical meaning of the multi-word. But the problem is that this doesn't look like a multi-word, because essere a casa is a normal regular expression, so you don't know that it is a multi-word. And so on. Every test is full of this type of things, and these are big problems. So with respect to these things, the problem that we have is what to encode, where is the limit between multi-words or metaphors and not, etc.
I just want to Chinese people here. No, on this question, I mean, it's not a Czech, I mean, it's not an English expression that the workers are at home, but it would be understood what's meant.
Literally.
No, not literally. That it means that they are unemployed.
Okay.
No, but what about in Chinese, in Mandarin? Would it be understood?
To me, what triggers the interpretation is the 2 out of 3, not the workers.
Okay, well, fine. But
It's a statistic.
in other words, I think we can understand a literal translation, even though it was meant in a metaphoric sense. And I wonder whether that's just for languages which are very similar to ours, like Italian, or whether it would, carry over. No answer.
Well, I think in Chinese we have similar things.
You would have similar things.
Really? Mm-hmm.
You can just analyze the word itself to understand the metaphors.
You can what?
Well, for the word it's
For the word, I'm sorry, I don't hear you. Just say
well, for the words which are used as metaphors,
yes.
you can analyze, you can understand the meaning of this kind of metaphor by analyzing
You can.
the components of
I go quickly through some other things. For example, we have seen that we can encode multi-words at different levels in our tree bank, different types of multi-words, at morphosyntactic, some at syntactic, some at semantic, and so on. And also, in general, metaphorical senses in dictionary are included in one of the main senses. But which one? Sometimes you don't know which one is a good one. And also when analyzing the main reason for disagreement between different annotators, we found that when there is some disagreement, this points to some problem in the dictionary, some problem at the lexicographic level. So if we go to the usual issue where is there a fixed set of senses, or do senses exist as separate objects? I think that criteria for sense distinction are very much application dependent, or task dependent, or domain dependent. So it's not that senses are those, and it depends on the task, on the domain, etc. So this makes me think whether to ask whether it's possible to have some common cross-lingual repository of generic senses, as we have, for example, in the ELI, in the WordNet that connects all the WordNets. And are we dealing with semantic annotation in the right way? I'm not sure. And in particular with respect to sensible, does sensible make sense as such? I'm not sure that it makes sense as such, really. Even though we do it, we participate, we prepare it, etc. Because WordNet fails to account for all contextual aspects. They are not encoded in WordNet, for example, and they are important. And many vague distinctions in WordNet, which are unproblematic for humans, become very problematic for the machine and generate unmotivated uncertainties. So some of the lessons that we learned is the inadequacy of currently available lexical resources. I don't go through the different types of problems which makes them inadequate, because we have mentioned them before. And a lot of problems come, as we said already, when there are divergences between lexical encoding and corpus annotation. And the main problem is that we in lexicon try to discriminate things while language is in reality a continuum. And I think all of the properties of language behave as a continuum and not as discrete properties in general. So it's very difficult to base description on clear-cut boundaries, at least when you work on a corpus with real data. So in general, there are tendencies toward rules, but not really rules, even more with meanings. So what I think should be done, probably using semantically tagged corpora or even corpora in general to acquire semantic information and answer lexicon, I think that we could just capture in a static lexicon, maybe built also by hand, to capture just the core basic distinctions. And then to enlarge, to enrich this core basic distinction with information which is extracted from the corpus, and the model of the lexicon should enable also the extraction and should enable the way in which you represent the information that you extract. And this additional information is in general of collocational type and must be acquired automatically, certainly not by hand. So if we eliminate all these dichotomies that usually are seen as dichotomies and we look at them as complementary perspectives, and we think that the choices on the syntagmatic axis is really important. What I see is that lexicon and corpus somehow must converge. They are usually thought as independent objects. I think they should become somehow one object in this concept of dynamic lexicon, where everyone is working on this for acquiring lexical information. That's a sort of dynamic lexicon, where in fact the lexicon and the corpus are going together. And what to annotate we have said. And we can somehow finish probably here with a question whether there is the need, or if it is possible, to have some common encoding policy. Which means, is it possible, is it feasible, is it desirable, to what extent? For example, to have a common semantic tag set, because if we want to have our resources interoperable and usable and shareable, and if we want to put together what we do for English here, for Italian there, and for Italian somewhere else, and so on, there must be some way of mapping what we do here, what they do there. And that's why we had all this project on standardization issues, and we have started in the last one to use also some of these semantic web standards, whatever the semantic web will be. We were discussing this at lunch, to make it possible somehow, and that's my vision of the future. That's what I'm pushing in Europe, if we can try to have some project where we design some sort of open infrastructure for language resources on the web, where we put many different types of resources on the web. Then standards are very important, and then you have web agents which are able to go in the web and to take out information which is needed for different tasks from different. That's my vision of the future. I don't know if it will happen. So thank you for your attention. I'm sorry if I've been too long.
Well, so I'm like curious in general about what you
Mm.
Sorry, can you, covering distance is a metaphor. That would be found in a dictionary of English. Seat of government would be found, it's a metaphor, or metonymy, it would be found in the English dictionary. What percentage of the uses of polysemous words are actually metaphorical, and how many of those are static, like not open, productive classes?
I don't have the answer of frequency. I can say that the impression is that there are many, many. I don't have real numbers because I could give you real numbers if we had means to discover and to analyze text and to say this is a metaphor, and we don't have.
Well, if 50% of uses are metaphorical,
But-
and 50% of those are productive, open
Yeah.
classes of generating metaphors, then it's kind of hopeless, really.
But there are quite many. I remember many years ago at one of the summer schools that was organized by Antonio Danfoli in Italy and in Pisa, it was Maurice Gross, who every day came for different class with the newspaper and starting to read by chance some piece of the text in the newspaper, and every 3 or 4 words he pointed out there was a metaphor. So it's everywhere. Yes, maybe not so much in terminological, in domain-specific
Well, I mean,
documents.
it's a question of what you call,
it depends.
what you call metaphorical. So I just,
Yeah, obviously.
from the announcement here, we claim that it is theoretically not possible to achieve completeness within any static lexicon. So is static metaphoric?
Yeah.
Is completeness metaphoric?
Probably yes.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
When does a metaphor turn into cliche and become fixed? It's just a sense that's inherent to the word as you understand it.
And
That's the question. How many of them are like that?
And there's figurative language outside metaphor. So you say that, you never find it, or it's very rare to find a verb used with both its senses. But while that might be a marked behavior, there's a name for the marked behavior, and it's actually used. It's called sukuma. So they're figurative. They're figures that involve more than just lexical metaphor.
Oh yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So how much of that is there?
Yeah. I've personally not studied metaphors. There is one person who made the PhD with us now. She's doing some work on metaphors. She's in Perugia.
I'm sorry. Who?
Antonietta Longe in Perugia. Probably you don't know her.
any other questions or remarks? Okay, well, thank you.
Thank you.